I bought half of a duplex, and in the other half, I found a Karen who turned my life into a real hell. Until I finally found a way to solve my problem once and for all. Subscribe to my channel, I'm the YouTube Fool, and turn on the bell for notifications. My husband and I, in our 30s and childless, saved for almost a decade to fulfill our dream of moving to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we made the risky decision and moved to our dream location, an expensive home, given the prices in Hawaii. All we could afford was half of a duplex, but it's beautiful, waterfront, with space for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob, the boyfriend, and their 3 troublemakers live in the other half of the duplex. Chapter 1, The Setup. For a while, we only spent a week here and there, but now we live here full-time. The duplex belonged to an older gentleman who rented both sides. The sides didn't match at all. One side had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, while the other side, which we bought, had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. We own 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and a dock about 150 feet long. The other side, with a small patio and 15 feet of dock, is rented. After buying the house, Karen tried to maintain unsolicited privileges. I told her that if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. But she interpreted this as freedom to use our backyard whenever she pleased. Chapter 2, The Confrontation. One day, while enjoying some drinks outside, a delivery truck showed up to set up a giant inflatable in our yard. I asked Karen what she thought she was doing, and she explained that it was her son's birthday. She had the audacity to say that it was an event for family and friends only, and we had to stay inside our own house, away from our own yard. Wanting to avoid a total conflict, I told Karen she would no longer have access to our yard. During the party, a drunk adult entered our house, claiming Karen owned the entire property. I was firm in directing him to Karen's bathroom. After the episode, we decided to build a fence to clearly define the yard boundaries and make improvements. Continues. Karen had to come snoop around when the fence was the last thing to be built. I was vague and only mentioned the patio update, and I could see her face light up because, in her mind, what is ours automatically belongs to her. When the workers started building the fence, Karen came out screaming for them to stop. I went out and told the workers to continue while asking Karen to leave. In true Karen style, she called the police. What followed was a comedy on my part. After explaining to the officer that we were building a fence on our property and that the owner, of whom Karen was a tenant, did not know about it, the officer scolded Karen severely. I thought her head was going to explode. She went back inside and slammed the glass door so hard it sounded like something was broken. We got our fence, and I thought it would be the end of it all, but of course, it wasn't. Chapter 4, The Boat Incident. One day, Billy Bob entered the scene, and he was as terrible as Karen. He threw cigarette butts and emptied bottles over the fence, claiming to defend his wife's honor. I didn't know that paradise included neighbors like Billy Bob, the epitome of the stereotype. Billy Bob owns a 30-foot fishing boat, but, of course, that side of the duplex has only 15 feet of docking since we have many docks and only one boat. We rent out the other docking spots month to month, and people come and go. If we don't get the rent by the end of the month, the boat disappears, and we don't think about it anymore. We had a tenant who tied his boat to the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed that space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us while we were out of town, telling the tenants to leave at the end of the month. Then, they parked Billy Bob's boat at the dock. I only found out weeks later because the tenant left a nasty review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and reneged on the verbal agreement to let them stay for another 3 months. I was perplexed, but after a call, I quickly pieced things together. I called the police, who told Karen and Billy Bob they needed to move their boats or they would be towed. Billy Bob punched a cop and ended up in jail. I felt sorry for the police, so I brought them snacks the next day, with a note apologizing for the neighbor drama. I won my small claims case against them for loss of rental income, but, of course, we still haven't seen a penny. I managed to convince the dock tenants to come back, giving them a few months free as compensation.
Chapter 5: The Final Revenge.
If you've made it this far, congratulations. Get ready for some juicy justice. With the market collapsing, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings.
Continues.
When the perfect opportunity arose for the owner who owned both properties, desperately needing money and tired of managing the property 3,200 kilometers away, thanks to Karen's constant calls for every little problem, he imposed a single stipulation that we let the poor single mother, his tenant for 8 years, terminate the lease, which would end in July. With money available and control over our neighbors, we decided to seize this opportunity.
Property registration under an LLC, a limited liability company, keeping Karen in the dark until 8 days ago. I went to her house, knocking on the door. Karen answered with a harsh word, asking what I wanted. I smiled, handed her the information from our new landlord, and gently reminded her that the rent would expire on Friday, offering the option to hand me the check for greater convenience. I saw her face pale, something I had only heard about. I explained to Karen that we would honor her rent until the end of July, but she should prepare to move, as we would remodel before the arrival of the next tenants. Goodbye, Karen. For clarification, many misunderstood the beginning of the story. Let's call our side of the duplex Operation Duplex and the other side Duplex Karen.
We bought Operation Duplex, and after the purchase, it was no longer a rental. Both were for sale independently, but we only had money for Operation Duplex.
Duplex Karen is still available for rent, as it was never sold. Now, we own both.
When we made improvements to Operation Duplex, it was our home, not a rental. I hope this clears up any confusion.
Update number 1, not much news yet. Karen and her family remain until the end of July. Rent is up to date, as far as I know.
We notified with a 30-day notice, and we will not renew the lease. We offered, in writing, the option to prorate July and waive the termination fee if they decide to leave before the contract ends. Besides the almost weekly noisy parties and issues with the kids, there's not much happening. Stay tuned for the next update. Update number 2, in summary, Karen and her family remain on site without paying rent. They received an eviction notice, but due to the COVID-19 situation, we cannot take action.
At least Karen and Billy Bob had a big fight, resulting in his arrest, and he did not return.
Our lawyer informed us that once some laws are changed, we can take action starting from September.
Continues.
We can ask the police to accompany them off the property that day since we've already initiated the eviction process. The situation is chaotic now, with Karen being extremely arrogant. She tried to keep up appearances, continuing to come to our property to talk to the police, but she's playing loud music and throwing trash everywhere. We really wanted to move our elderly parents to that side of the duplex after a quick renovation because my father needs shoulder surgery, and my mother needs a walker. They need more care, and it's getting difficult to drive 2 hours a day for that. However, they want their own space and don't want to live next to us. We're not trying to get angry and make things worse with Karen, but we're both exhausted. Things are tough. Moving 6 months into the future, update number 3, life is strange.
Karen is still here as we couldn't complete the eviction process.
My partner went to stay with his parents for a few months so my in-laws could get the surgery and care they needed. They're better now, which is great. However, the weird part is that, in October, Karen's mother, Susan, came to live with her after Susan's landlord chose not to renew her lease. Susan is an angel, was shocked by Karen's house and the kids' behavior. Susan is a tough person but has made an effort to clean up the house, both figuratively and literally. The kids behave much better, and Karen walks around like a solemn one. Susan and I share drinks every few days in the backyard, bake together every weekend for Thanksgiving and Christmas. We had a big feast and organized games in the yard. It was a great time, and even Karen was being friendly. I tried to tell Susan not to worry about the rent until they find another place, but she insisted on paying. We lied about the rent amount, so it's only half the payment, covering only insurance and taxes. We drafted another monthly lease agreement.
Susan wants to go back home at some point and take her daughter with Karen.
I think she's ready for a change too, but obviously, with the current situation, it may take some time. It's very pleasant now, although there's no rush for them to leave. With all that's been said, I realize I was naive to buy the duplex part where Karen lived and try to evict her to avoid dealing with her anymore.
I didn't expect the story to take this turn.
I thought that once the process started, she couldn't leave due to the current situation, which would result in an ugly outcome. The unexpected variable was her mother, Susan, arriving and basically making peace among everyone.
Susan is called an angel by Operation and has reconciled Karen, saying she was shocked by the situation and the children's behavior.
Throughout this situation, Karen straightened up, Susan and Operation became friends, sharing drinks and cooking together every weekend.
She even tried to reassure Karen about the rents until they found another place.
So, this whole situation took a complete 180 degrees turn, all because of Susan's personality coming into play, correcting many of the damages caused since the pre-Susan era.
I can't believe she actually ordered a delivery truck to bring that giant bounce house into the yard without even asking Operation if it was okay.
Operation probably would have agreed, but the fact that she did it without saying anything is amazing. Moreover, she brought random people, all drunk, into our house. Everyone has neighbors, but when you live in a duplex, you share some common space, or at least, it feels like shared space. Obviously, in this case, it wasn't, but they were using it as such for a while. Often, that's a recipe for different types of disasters to happen. Operation strategically built the yard so that the fence would be the last piece to be put in place. Then, this character comes and prevents the construction workers from finishing the job, calling the police as a last resort. If we think deeply, Karen is probably thinking in the best interest of her son, but she doesn't know how to interact normally without seeming like she's taking advantage of anything good that happened.
I don't believe she is inherently evil or does crazy things for fun. She's probably just taking care of her kids and doesn't know how to handle it in a way that makes sense. How would you deal with this whole situation? Let me know below. Fool or not, and why do I consider myself foolish for threatening to evict my father and his family from the house they currently live in?
My father quit his job and refuses to work, preferring to play and drink all day. Our country has bad laws regarding child support, so my mother had to support my sister and me alone as we grew up. I tried to reconnect with my father, but it felt like all the effort to reconcile was mine. Eventually, I gave up and minimized contact. I kept in touch with my father's side of the family, his brothers and cousins, and maintained a good relationship with them. Now, my sister and I live comfortably. Our parents remarried, my mother to a nice man, living abroad for 5 years. My father married a woman the same age as my younger sister, who was always hostile. When my sister sought out our father, she got upset and accused of trying to steal him. They have a child together, and although I'm fine with him, our father's wife continued with her bad behavior. My sister and I decided to cut ties with them. My father's mother died last year. A few months ago, my father's older sister, responsible for the parents' assets, contacted us about our grandmother's will. Both grandparents are dead, and all the assets were divided among the grandchildren. I got my grandparents' house, the same one my father and his family currently live in. Since I live miles away from the said house and have no plans to move there, my aunt suggested I sell it and keep the money for myself. She insisted a lot, claiming it was what my grandmother would want, as my father neglected her in the last years of her life and put her in a nursing home. According to her, he also sold her cemetery plot to buy drugs. Given that, I agreed to sell the house. After all, it's my inheritance. However, I haven't sold the house yet, but I called my father to inform him about it so they could start looking for a new place. I wanted to be transparent and give them a heads up. My father wasn't pleased, but he didn't argue. Meanwhile, his wife got furious and called to yell at me, claiming I was being selfish and didn't need the house. She let slip that her parents and siblings also live there. Basically, she tried to make me feel guilty because now they have to pay rent. I ignored her, but she kept harassing me through text messages and cursing at me. At this point, I was upset, so I told her that if she didn't stop harassing me, I would have them evicted as soon as possible, even though no one is buying the house yet. My father found out, said I was a total idiot. His wife and siblings also found out and supported me. They said his wife was never nice to them, and it was she who convinced my father to take my grandmother out of her own house and put her in that nursing home so that her family could move in. Before deciding if I'm a fool or not, there was an update. Last week was exhausting, both physically and mentally, but here's an update. I followed most of the advice here. I decided to evict them as soon as possible. A few days after my post, I flew to my parents' hometown, where the house is located. I decided to stay for a week and asked for moral support from my best friend, who came the next day. My aunt managed to put me in touch with her lawyer, who provided the necessary documents to establish ownership of the house. She also connected me with the local police. My aunt is out of the country, so she couldn't be there in person. In my country, there are laws that protect occupants, and they can contest the eviction. I talked to the police and asked for help if things got difficult. Since it's a small town where people know each other, they know how problematic my father was, and my grandmother was highly respected for being an educator. It didn't take long to convince them to agree to help me. I contacted the former caretaker of the house, whom my father fired, and asked him to accompany me. I also sought information and found out that his wife and her family have a house, although mine is much larger and nicer. 2 days after arriving, I went to the house with my best friend, the caretaker, and a couple of police officers to warn my father and the freeloaders 3 days in advance. As expected, my father's wife made a scene and got hysterical because they would be homeless. She called me heartless, ungrateful, cruel, etc. My father, on the other hand, took a passive stance. He acted the same way when my mother kicked him out, without arguing, but he also never admitted his faults. He said he wouldn't wait 3 days and would leave the next day. He called me an ungrateful daughter, prophesying that my karma would catch up with me. Many people advised me to ensure that they didn't steal things, but honestly, I didn't care about the belongings. I warned them that they could take what they needed, except for some old wooden furniture that my grandmother loved. That would make the cleaning on eviction day easier. I didn't talk to them, just watched as they packed their things into a truck. I paid the caretaker to clean the house in the coming days and told her she could keep whatever she wanted, as Grandma would approve. I had the locks changed, installed extra locks, chained the gates, and cut off contact with my father and his wife. The next step is the sale, and I'm planning to sell it below market value just to get it over with. There's still a lot to do in terms of selling the house, but at least the drama is over. I'm tired but relieved. I also wonder if I'm a fool for threatening to evict my father and his family from the house they currently live in. For some reason, throughout all this time, I could only imagine the mother from The Sopranos, Tony Soprano's mother, and how she resisted when they tried to move her to a nursing home. This whole story made me visualize the faces of the various members of the Soprano family. But when it comes to this situation, I don't think there was any way to avoid creating a rift between the father, the family, and the operation, who was the daughter. Even if they had waited until they had a buyer, I think there would still be a lot of tension. The father would probably think she is ungrateful. They might consider the fact that she didn't profit from the house before the grandmother's death as a reason not to make money now. The operation didn't exactly explain how she would use the money, but maybe for other investments or to try to get a place of her own where she lives. It's a complicated situation, and maybe it would have been smoother if she had explained that she was trying to buy a house in her town for her future family and couldn't support her father's whole family with her money. After all, the house is now a new asset of hers, her new property. The operation detailed the complicated relationship with her father while growing up and how she tried to reconcile, but he just wasn't interested. If she had a better relationship with her father, she might have let him stay there for free indefinitely. However, the situation is complex, and if he wasn't there for her when she needed him, why would she be there for him now? Not that he even admitted he needed her in this situation, as he didn't even want to accept the 3 days to move out and left the next day. If you were in this situation, just inheriting a large and expensive house where your father currently lives, what would you do? Evict, let them stay, or seek some other solution? Let me know in the comments if you think I'm a fool or not and why. And don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to follow the next stories in this series, using the playlist at the top of the description. Thank you for sticking around until the end of another incredible story from the HistoReddit channel. If you enjoyed this narrative full of twists and turns, don't forget to share it with your friends
and family.
If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now, give it a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell to not miss any fascinating stories coming up. Your support is essential for the channel's growth.
Until the next story.